of a saga. And Robin and I and my cousins would have piano lessons here. And if memory serves me right, where this Dollarama is where there was consumers distributing. So consumers distributing was very much like an Argos in the UK. I don't know what the equivalent would have been in the US, but essentially you purchase products by looking them up in a catalog and then sort of fill out a form, and then stock people go get the goods that you've ordered. So what am I talking about today? Let's go back to my evil science lair and let's talk about it. Hello everyone, and welcome back to Iain the Tech Bear. My name is Iain Bennett and I'm your host for this channel. So what are we talking about today? Well, this is the first video that I'm making about this lovely computer. This is a Timex Sinclair 1000. It was originally developed by Sinclair Research in the UK. It was originally called the ZX81 and had 1K of memory. However, Timex got involved, wanted to sell a computer of their own in North America, and of course made modifications and created a 2K variant. So this is my original one. It's actually, I've taken it apart many years ago, and here's the motherboard for it. So it features a Z80 CPU, hence where it sort of got its name. There was a predecessor called the ZX80, which was also based on the CPU, very similar design. The ZX81 and the Timex Sinclair 1000 sort of took it to the next level, and with an arithmetic logic unit, the memory, keyboard's very similar, very membrane, yeah, not a great typing experience. And with 2K of memory, there was very little you could actually do with this computer. You could program it, and it was, well, in black and white glory, you can sort of see on my screen here. So why did I take a video outside a Dollarama? So that was actually where my mom and I actually went and actually picked up this computer 40 years ago this month. So it's October 2023, so that takes us back to 1983, after piano lessons one day. It was an amazing day for me. And I remember the discussion we had actually in the store. It was between the Timex Sinclair 1000 and a Texas Instruments 994A. $30 difference, so this was $69.99 back in 1983, and the Texas Instruments was $99 at the time. And we hummed and hawed. Was this computer better than obviously the Texas Instruments 994A is a much better computer. It is fully color. It was actually 16-bit. It was the first 16-bit home computer available, if I recall correctly. However, we went with this one because it was a little bit cheaper, and of course, Mom was making a big investment in my future. I was 9 years old at the time, and is Iain going to take two computers? Well, I had already seen my first computer, which was an Apple II at a school that I had gone to, the school I had gone to in grade 2. And of course, the school that I was at in grade 3 had Commodore PETs. So I was already kind of drawn to computers and was looking to build up my experience as a kid. And it was like the next big thing, right, for a kid in those days. This was it. So this is what I started with. Now, this particular computer, I am going to assume it still works. I may do a video on trying to run this computer again in the future. I don't see why it wouldn't run. It's been out of its case and it's been sort of carried around with me for, well, 40 years. But there was one problem with this computer that unfortunately I caused. I dropped something on the keyboard, and if you look very carefully, the Y key is damaged, and it's actually more damaged, I think, now.
as I look at it. So that Y key is pretty damaged, unfortunately. Now, I also figured out how to fix it a little bit because I just stuck a little knife in there and popped it up. Because again, membrane keyboards, they work very much on touch, and so the connection piece obviously was sort of sorted a little bit by that. But yeah, after that, and of course, by the time this actually happened, I was still using this, but I also had another computer that I was given a few months later, actually by my father, which was a Commodore 64, which we'll talk about in another video. So, so I didn't really use this computer much past, I would say, 1988. Now, I was also given another computer, another Timex Sinclair 1000 by a friend of mine, and a whole bunch of software packages. So I actually have those in my garage right now. And a lot of those I actually have on my retro gaming emulations. However, last weekend I was in Ottawa visiting my partner Stay, and he gave me this. So I actually have three Timex Sinclair 1000s on hand. And this one, again, I've not tested to see if it works. Um, it probably does. And actually, I'm kind of curious about the serial number. So this was actually created before this one. So 148305 versus 160541. Same model number and everything. This one actually looks in pretty good condition as well. So the keyboard itself is pretty clear, and the case and even the FCC tag on the back is pretty good. So that's the keyboard there. So any video that you will see on the Timex Sinclair 1000 will often talk about the keyboard, and it will talk about the RAM pack. So at the time that we purchased the Timex Sinclair 1000, two things came free with the computer. I got a tape of games called Mixed Game Bag 1, which I actually cannot remember if that was a 2K game series or a 16K. I'll have to look that up. The ticker below will actually probably state whether it was 16 or 2K. However, the pièce de résistance that came also with the game, or sorry, with the computer, was Frogger. So imagine my disappointment when looking at the package and realizing that I needed the 16K RAM pack in order to play Frogger, a game that I wanted to have, ever since seeing it in an arcade, and I couldn't play it. And it wouldn't be for at least 6 months until I could actually play that game. My birthday, I think it was my birthday 1984, where I received the 16K RAM pack for my birthday, which was an amazing gift. However, the challenge with the 16K RAM pack is you'd plug it into the expansion port here, and if you move the computer even the slightest, the 10 minutes it took to load Frogger off of tape was totally kaput. It was totally like crashed in the water. So kind of a frustrating computing experience, frustrating gaming experience, because also joysticks didn't really exist for this at that time, or at least I didn't know where we could get peripherals for the Timex Sinclair 1000. Certainly, I did learn, later in time that yes, you could purchase expansion packs and you could add joysticks to this, I believe. Kind of like the Kempston joysticks for the ZX Spectrum. So yeah, frustrating, right? And I think I only played Frogger maybe 2 or 3 times, and then of course trying to load that thing from the you know jacks here off of a tape drive and getting the volume just right. I mean, kind of nostalgic, right? Thinking about those days, but they were really frustrating. And yeah, so, oh, one other thing. no sound. So you're playing Frogger, and you know it was literally no sound and chunky graphics. So there you go. That's Frogger for the Sinclair ZX81 Timex Sinclair 1000 with 16K. So quite an interesting experience back in those days. Um, I have always had an affinity for this computer. It is quirky. Um, it is, from an industrial design perspective, it's actually quite neat. I mean, it's kind of beautiful wedge shape. It's all in one, and you know, from an industrial design perspective, it's functional, relatively speaking. You know, yes, the keyboard's horrible, but but you know, compared to modern keyboards that we have today, it kind of fits in, if you will. Um, so yeah, I've got a lot of affinity for this. I have a lot of affinity for British computers anyway, just because they weren't as popular over here, um, but they drove computing in the UK. And I've spent a lot of time in the UK. I did part of my degree in computer science in the UK, and um, you know, the entrepreneurship of the UK and computing, especially in the Cambridge area where Sinclair was based, was really quite fascinating. So computers such as, obviously Sinclair Research, you've got Acorn, so the BBC Micro, you've got the Archimedes that also came from Acorn based on the ARM architecture, which is very popular. And of course, Raspberry Pi. This is my overclocked Pi 4 with a heatsink on it. Um, so yeah, I've got a bit of affinity for the British computing scene. And also the fact that the Commodore Amiga, which I was a huge proponent of the Amiga, really took off in the UK. A huge number of games being developed from UK software houses such as Psygnosis, which was owned by or purchased by Sony, became Sony Liverpool. Or Sony Studios Liverpool studio. So yeah, there you can see some of the connections of the British computing scene, etc. And over the years, and just how important computers are, certainly within that scene. I didn't know too many people with these. So most people I knew were very Commodore based because certainly, at least in the Halton region where I grew up, a lot of the schools were very Commodore based. So PETs, 64s, VIC 20s, and even when I went to school in Hamilton for the latter parts of elementary school, again that school was very Commodore 64 focused, but also IBM PC Junior focused. So there was probably only one other person that I knew who had this computer, and he actually gave me that in around 1988, may have been 1987. And then, of course, Stey gave me this one last weekend. So now, also with the Timex Sinclair 1000, not only was there the 16K RAM pack, although there were also from third parties other RAM packs, such as 64K RAM pack. That would have been kind of epic. I don't know what I'd do with this computer with 64K, but still, there was a printer, and one of the things I had as a kid was I had a pop can collection because there were some cool pop cans that were out there with art on them, celebrating things. And so this was an old Coke Classic can, 280 milliliters from Canada. So I would create little containers that hold, in this case, printouts. And I have not taken any of these out since I don't know, the 1980s for sure, with program listings of various games. And so where did I print this from? From a Timex Sinclair 2040 printer. It was thermal, and yeah, Ader the Gator. Huh. So yeah, these are old programs. Now, unfortunately, some of these programs, because the paper has actually faded. So the last few lines of code, unfortunately, they are slightly, you can almost sort of see them. I sort of see it in white. So, it would be kind of an interesting archive project. But yeah, I've saved a number of programs. I no longer have that printer. It broke, unfortunately, and I did get rid of it. However, so some of these programs that I have in here were courtesy of a family friend that I referenced in my blog at ian.mahan, or Mathan, MATHAN.ca. So a gentleman by the name of Kenyon Taylor. So Kenyon was the inventor, or a co-inventor, I should say, of the trackball. And he worked for Ferranti in Manchester and here in Canada, and I believe also in Scotland, if I recall his history. He does have a Wikipedia page. But yes, friends of the family of my grandparents, and we would visit him in Mindamoya, which is on Manitoulin Island here in the province of Ontario, here in Canada. And he had Timex Sinclair 1000. So when we visited, I saw that computer at the age of 10 and 11, because we visited twice before he passed away in 1986. I was all like a Twitter, because he had the same computer, so that was something that he and I had connected on, and he actually introduced me to trigonometry. So early lessons in graphing and trigonometry on this computer. So I used some of the graphics functions to display sine curves and things like that, which was very useful once I got into high school and algebra classes. So very much a time I adore and very much appreciate, having that experience while growing up. So this is something that I've kept around and will continue to keep around, as a little bit of nostalgia from these days of the Timex Sinclair 1000. I have no plans immediately of entering these programs, but I certainly do want to keep these around. And maybe I should figure out a way to scan these. I do have a scanner upstairs, so that they are in archives. And who knows, maybe some optical character recognition could print it out, and then there's a way to copy it into an emulator, and then save it. I was going to say save it to tape. Oh yeah, save it to a tape file and go from there. So yeah, definitely a piece, an archival piece for sure for this computer. So, I'm very thankful that my mother, she was a single mom. We were living with my grandparents, and we continued to live with my grandparents until I certainly moved away to university. So, she spent her hard-earned money buying this computer for me, and not really knowing, was her son going to take to the technology? And of course, I got a degree in computer science. I work in the field. I've spent time as a programmer, as a consultant, and these days I'm kind of doing both in my current role. So yeah, I certainly took advantage of learning programming on this computer, and just learning about computers in general. And I took to it like a fish to water. So something I very, very, very much appreciate. So programming it. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about programming it. It came with BASIC. So this was the computer that I actually learned BASIC on. So 10 print hello, 20 go to 10. Although it was very quirky because for this one, if you did that, it wouldn't continue scrolling like it does on slightly more modern computers like the Commodore 64. It would scroll to a full page and then ask you, would you like to scroll, continue scrolling? I guess for some reason the Xbox controllers came up. There we go. Back to Frogger. So you actually had to use a scroll command, and then it would scroll from the bottom up. It was quite interesting. The other thing is, if you look at the keyboard, it has all the commands on it. So, for example, would I hit L for load? No, that is let. J is load. So to load Frogger, I hit J and then shift PP for quotes, because quotes were on the P key, right? Yeah, it wasn't shift 2. Shift 2 was and. So yeah, very quirky. You had to either memorize or remember where the commands were. But what that did, was it made entry much faster. So I know some people complain a lot about the basic that was on here and how horrible the entry was, but it was well thought out from the perspective of 10p quote and then or quote and then your message and then quote, right? So you didn't have to enter the full word for the command in BASIC. So I actually thought that was brilliant. I still think that's kind of brilliant. I mean, think about type ahead today in modern IDEs. You start typing, part of an API, and especially if the IDE happens to know the API that you're using. So, for example, at work with JavaScript and SweetScript, some of the APIs that I use in SweetScript 2.0 are already there, so I can just partially type and hit tab. Very fast for development, and I'm all about efficiency and stuff. So yeah, and then the cursor keys, shift 5, 6, 7, 8 for left, down, up, and right. For games like Frogger, I don't remember the key commands. I'm thinking it's A, Z, N, and M. Let's check that out. So one player, let's see. Yeah, I remembered, and you can see just how slow that is. And like I'm hitting N quite a bit, and yeah, it's not responsive. Let's see, can I actually get died. Let's try this again. So A. Oh, I should have fallen in the water there. There we go. Wow. Bonus 50 for a safe frog. And I did that in 24 seconds. So there you go. You can see the fun of trying to play Frogger on a 16K ZX Spectrum. Or sorry, ZX. You can see the fun of trying to play Frogger on a ZX81 or a Timex Sinclair 1000. So kind of funny that I am emulating this on an AMD 7950 X3D with a 7900 XTX. And funnily enough, I'm seeing my graphics card actually, the fans going on it. So it can't keep up. Of course it can keep up, but still kind of hilarious. And there we go, game over. So remember what I said about scrolling from the bottom. So I've got essentially a Hello World program on this computer, the emulator, and it's 3 lines. So 10 scroll, 20 print hello, and then 30 go to 10. So when I run that, you can see scrolling happens from the bottom. Now on the keyboard, I had to remember what key is used to actually break the program. And you know what it is? It's that space key right there. So I'm hitting escape and it's like it's exiting the emulator. I'm like, no, that's not what I want. And then I've done that a few times, and then hit space, and there we go. It gives an error message that says D30, which essentially means program was broken on line 30. So if I hit enter, you're going to see it takes a while to clear the screen, and then it actually shows the program. Now, one of the really cool things about BASIC on the Timex Sinclair 1000 is see that little cursor that's next to line 30. It kind of says that, hey, I'm on line 30. So I can hit Shift 1, and it brings up that line to edit very quickly. And if I hit Shift 7, which is the up arrow key, it goes to the previous line, and there we go. There's 20 print hello. So what I'm going to do is I am going to edit line 30 and change it to go to 20, and let's see what actually happens with the program. So it had some really cool, and actually on the simulator I can actually use the arrow keys. Now, one of the things also I'm going to point out is when I'm actually using keyboard, I can't type at full speed. It won't actually accept the keys that quickly. Why? Because this computer doesn't have its own dedicated graphics chip or anything like that. So you hit a key, it has the interrupt to do whatever it needs to read the input, and then it's using the CPU to actually render the image on the screen. So if I hit R, it's reading, the key press R, and then it finally says, okay, I can finally print run. And there we go. So, and there we go. It's, I did a semicolon, so hello semicolon, so it tries to stay on the same line. And what's funny is because I had that scroll command, it started at the bottom of the screen, and then it gave me a 520 error, which means it's essentially stopped at line 20. Now, if I recall correctly, I know the Spectrum asks scroll question mark. I thought the Sinclair 1000 did as well. So I'm going to clear out line 10. So 10 enter. Oh, the original also did the screen refresh thing that you just saw, which is emulated in the emulator. By the way, I thought that was really cool. A really cool touch. Again, the reason it does that is because, again, it's re-rendering the screen and etc. Now, the other cool thing about this computer is you had slow, which was Shift D, and then you had fast, which was Shift F. In fast mode, it would blank out the screen and it would behave much faster. And the reason for that, again, has to do with the fact that the CPU is being used to render the screen. So you turn off the screen, do your processing, re-render the screen, or render the screen and then in a buffer and then display the screen, and bam, there you go. And then slow mode, which I have back on now, would, it takes the time to render the screen nicely, etc. But it still had challenges with, I think it's vertical syncing, horizontal or vertical. So the vertical syncing. So anyway, I've taken away that 10 scroll line. Let's see what happens. So I'm running the program and it runs from top, doing what I expect it to, and it gives me the 520 error. So yeah, Spectrum will ask to scroll, the ZX81 Timex Sinclair 1000 doesn't. So there you go. That's hello world. Well, hello on a Timex Sinclair 1000. There you go. Thank you for watching this quick video on the Timex Sinclair 1000, and we will talk again soon.